We'd found ourselves in Hong Kong with 5 days off.
If you can get the four of us in a room together, like really good stuff tends to happen.
It was a rare opportunity that we sensed where we could get into the studio and see what new Blur might sound like.
I knew that if there was going to be a Blur record, and that was the big pressure, that it had to be flipping good. It was a sort of series of fortunate events, I've been calling it, that got us to this point. And I think it was a big festival in Japan that was cancelled, and I was going, oh, what a surprise.
It was literally a sort of way of using our time, and I thought, it's like, we'll make it in 5 days and then put it out the next week or something like that.
I think because we've been doing a few gigs and we got used to playing with each other again, it was completely unself-conscious. There was no sense of pressure of like, on Tuesday the 12th of July you will go into the studio with such and such a producer and try and write your comeback single. It was just, let's just go in the studio and play, because actually there's nothing else to do once you've been shopping in Hong Kong.
The wonderful thing about being in Hong Kong was there was no distractions, and it was a very sort of grounding process, really, because we all got on the tube again together, basically.
We get out of the tube station, there'll be lots of kids going to school, won't be pretty hustly and bustly, but nowhere near as busy as the main Hong Kong bit. And then we'd walk up this street and it was just life going on. It wasn't particularly a classy area or anything like that. And we'd go down this tiny little muggers alley and then come out the other side, cross the road, and there was this nondescript sort of door. We'd go up the stairs, in this tiny little lift actually. We'd go up there and then we'd be in this studio.
It was in a back street called Nanking Street, and you got there on the Central Line, and the stop was called Jordan, and it was a very nondescript building. It was called the Acme Building. It had no windows, but it's really small. Really, really cramped.
I was sitting here, my amps were in this cupboard, and Damon was right next to me with this sort of synthesizers. Alex was just there, and then Dave was out sort of isolated, but then we were like, oh, this is rubbish, and we got him in here. So we were all in the control room, and we weren't particularly meticulous about how we set up. But it was just good to just feel free and to just get a couple of chord sequences and go round it. And because quite often when you record, it's a lot less casual.
We just went in there and just played our hearts out. And I think if you listen to the music, there's a sense of urgency about it. It was really like our very first rehearsal, just the four of us in a sweaty, horrible room, just kicking the can around and really enjoying each other's playing and company, and it felt good.
It seemed very familiar. We slotted back in with each other. The fact that we got so much done in so little time, I think, speaks to the fact that there wasn't a kind of getting to know me, getting to know you session. It was straight into the deep end.
Everything was just about putting ideas down. Every day we got there and we just played, and when we'd had enough of each other and we're exhausted, we stopped.
It was very loose, really, and then the jams were so long that I think we naturally did everything that we probably could before we just started and looking bored again. We kind of spent ourselves on every bit. And then it would be like, what about these chords? Go these chords, blah, blah, blah. And we're shouting out chords. And this was kind of how these things were born, and Damon was saying things that were coming into his head, really. we got back and got into our domestic lives. All the time there was this thing, well, I wonder if anything will happen to that. It felt really good, but then thinking, well, was it ever the point for it to become anything? Was the point of it was just a jam, was it?
I think it's much easier to start something than finish something, and that initial sense of pace and momentum, gathering steam, as soon as the band were all apart again, I guess it just dissipated.
I remember us being quite excited at the end of it. I certainly felt we'd made some good progress and done some fun, interesting, good work.
There was definitely enough there to suggest that a record could be made, but I sort of went off and did my own thing, which everyone else did. And then I think Graham just sort of at some point wanted to do something and really felt that there was enough material in there to do something with.
We played a lot, and there was a lot of different sorts of jams loosely based around this or that, chord sequences. But we couldn't really call them songs, so it wasn't like they were fully formed anything. No melody lines particularly. So it just felt like it was a sort of a weird exercise to fill some time for a while. I guess it was last autumn. I just gave it a lot of thought. I want to have a look at it. I really want to just see, because if it is there, I'd regret it for the rest of my life. And I think it's, as a musician, I suppose, and as a member of the group, I felt it's kind of a weird duty. You know, I'd messed up with Blur quite a lot in the past. I thought maybe, you know, if I have a look at this stuff and something comes of it, it would be a sort of redress the balance of past shame or something.
Just take somebody to push things along. It would surprise me if I'd have done it. But that might have surprised me.
I just phoned management and I just said, look, I really would like, I've got an idea. I want to have a look at this stuff. I think it's so overwhelming a job to go through all that, sift through all that jamming, whatever. But I really think we have to do it, and all we have to do is find the right person to sift through it. And I think that's Stephen Street. And they said, okay, talk to Damon about it. So I met up with Damon and I said, I'd really like to have a look at this stuff. Because, it's not often I go and meet with Damon in this secret place. And he's like, come on then, what's going on? Because he'd had an inkling.
He just came up to the studio and we had a chat about it, and I said, well, that's a wonderful idea. I mean, it was kind of like, it was like music to my ears, literally, because it was like, oh, Graham, he's sort of back.
I was pretty nervous about it because you set and get, even though we're oldest of friends, brothers, etc., you still double guess a little bit. You're still not quite sure how he's going to take the idea of me taking the reins on this one for a little while, or sitting in the hot seat on it, or taking it away to like fiddle about it. You don't know how much trust you have within the whole thing. But he was like, yeah, fantastic, and he just seemed relieved. And he went, Stephen Street, and I went, yeah, I think Stephen Street.
It was probably too overwhelming a thing for Damon. It was 5 days of jamming. Some of the jams were like an hour long, and it started off as a rock song, and then it was a ballad at 40 minutes, and then another 10 minutes in, it's getting funky. It's a massive task to edit it all and make a coherent thing out of it. But I think that's what Graham managed to do brilliantly, and Streety. I mean, I think the two of them, between them, I don't think it would have happened.
Me and Steve went over to Damon's studio, with our gift, whatever it is. And Damon came in, and we were all laughing and joking a little bit and disguising the fact that we were all pretty nervous about it. It was presentable, but it was a long way from finished, if you know what I mean. But the songs had been restructured, the dynamics and all of that. There was a lot of shape in them, and you could tell. I mean, within a few days when I've been working on them with Steve, I could tell that it was just amazing, and it was getting really exciting, day after day after day after day.
I get a phone call from Graham saying, well, you need to come and there's a bit of crap bass on this one here. Can you come and do it again, please? And I pitched up to a studio in Bermondsey. We had to pretend that we've got to keep this secret because, like, if word gets out and then the pressure starts building, it's going to be another non-starter. So keeping it secret was vital.
When Stephen sent the tracks round the first time, yes, there's some obvious holes in it, but actually that all seems fairly doable.
The only reason I kind of hadn't sort of pursued it any further was just I just had so much other stuff on, and I was obviously trying to avoid being in Blur. I mean, I do try and avoid to be in Blur. Not that might come across as a negative, but it's not. It's something which is much bigger than me.
I've never been sure whether Damon likes to have the responsibility with the Blur thing or he hates it. So that was the gamble, you know. It was a gamble. But you know, I think I put it in the nicest possible way, and I needn't have done really. He would have said just do it anyway. But you know, it was like if you don't think it's any good by the time we've gone through it, then we'll bin it and we'll put it down to something that was a nice 5 days, but didn't amount to much.
I was getting kind of more excited by the sound of it as it progressed, and also slightly more sort of reticent about, oh God, if I like that, that means and then that means, and then it sort of stretched off into the future, and I was back in Blur. For me, one of the interesting things lyrically about working on this record was that I was left with all of this sort of memory residue when I listened to it with Graham and Stephen. At that point, it was still, well, what is this about? It's unclear what this is about, and what do I want it to be about? I have no idea. I mean, what do I sing about on a new Blur record? I decided to go back on my own to Hong Kong. I was there for a day and a half, but I mean, I just literally got off the plane and just started writing and filming and everything, and sort of basically just relived all the habitual journeys and the exceptional journeys that I've ever made.
I didn't know he was going back to Hong Kong, and it's a sensible thing to do because it's all about momentum. Damon said he didn't quite know what he was going to write about, so I think that was his solution to that problem, to go back to Hong Kong and try and reignite the vibe.
I felt like a bit like a spaceman, and I started to take on dystopian levels of personal isolation and angst and fear. You know, it all got quite intense. That's really helpful when you're writing, to have a bit of that in there. Within this day and a half, I went on the tube to Nanking Street. I walked around the whole of that neighbourhood. I went out to the outlying islands. I walked on the walkway, which is this insane kind of connecting covered passageway through downtown Hong Kong. So you don't actually ever have to go on a street. And there's a lot of these escalators, so you don't have to walk up any of the steep hills anymore. So you can almost sort of be completely static. And it's very dreamlike. Hong Kong, although it's an incredibly frenetic place, because it's sort of going so fast that it sort of slows down and becomes really interesting.
No idea he was going to go there. I thought it was amazing when he told me. I thought, well, there's commitment for you. That meant that I'd done my job. You know, I'd actually inspired him to go to Hong Kong and cram in as much in 48 hours as he could.
If you put all the time together, it's been a really, really, really quick, spontaneous record.
I think they were probably the most productive sessions we've ever had. Well, at least because everyone thought it was too late for another baby, but they've given us that. So it was a kind of intense fertility treatment.
The album pretty much is quite a heavy record, I think. lyrically, really, and how it sounds and how it makes you feel. I think it really couldn't be made by us until we were this sort of age and have experienced this and that and the other. But when Ong Ong comes on, it's all like...
That was a kind of end-of-day song as well, a bit like Go Out. You've had a hard day, and you just sort of, let's just try and do one more tune before we get back on that hot, sticky tube. The Ong Ong was the title of the original idea that I brought on my garage band to the sessions. There was no explanation for it, and so when I went back to start writing the lyrics over Christmas, I Googled Ong Ong. I said, what was I thinking about? What on earth was Ong Ong about? Because that title to that particular little idea from my garage band was maybe 4 years old or something like that. And I thought, that's interesting, because that might help me with writing the song. There's some clue to why I'd called it Ong Ong. I Googled it and there's absolutely nothing. There's one dodgy sort of trading company that is sort of indirectly connected to someone like Starbucks or something in Malaysia or something, and that's it. There's no sort of revelation to be found on Ong Ong. And then it suddenly occurred to me, and this is the extraordinary thing about it, is that if you put an H and a K, you've got Hong Kong. And I honestly, that occurred to me a few months ago. But it had no relation to it. But how extraordinary that a record about Hong Kong contains a song called Ong Ong. It is symbolic of the serendipity of the record.
The hallmark of a good record is that it has lots of different centres, I suppose. But the main triumphant chest-beating thing for me is that it just hangs together like a really coherent body of work, and it sounds like Blur at their best.
Ghost Ship, what's going on there? It's sort of like Compass Point, Blue Eyed Soul. It's weird, but I love it.
My technical guy, guitar bloke, had just sort of slung this Stratocaster together for me. It made me be able to do big bendy things, which turn up on the record.
The Magic Whip is quite an ambiguous title. I spent quite a lot of time in China and I really, really love the culture. But there's this extraordinary control that goes on sort of almost subliminally everywhere. And I have a lot more understanding of that now, having sort of read about the true nature of the Cultural Revolution.
Each of our personal development is only something that we ourselves can really experience. I can't experience Damon's. It was done over there, and the same with him. So what we bring to the records are, I always think of it as separate quests that we went on, and we have a rucksack of what we've experienced, things we've learned, sounds, etc., and new ideas.
I kind of sort of understand why there's so much control. I don't necessarily agree with many aspects of that control, but I think, it is the magic whip, and the whip is control, but the magic is kind of, it's very prevalent in the Far East. North Korea. I'd read a lot about it. I was utterly fascinated with how could this place still exist and what was going on there. So I got myself into the country and I travelled around. I was looked after incredibly well. Everyone was really charming. Everyone's kind of under a spell. That's what I would say about it. But that's in itself extraordinary. And there's no advertising, there's no internet, there's no telephones. It is very clearly a very sort of underdeveloped country in many ways, and quite beautiful. I mean, you still see people with headscarves on working in the fields. It's very pastoral in many ways. The song Pyongyang is about my day spent visiting the mausoleum of the great leaders. It's kind of a postcard home on the last day of the regime to my daughter, telling her that I'm going to get out.
It always feels just like the old days. I've got no idea how old I am. When I'm with the rest of them, it's just sort of like a parallel universe. It's kind of nice that we've all done other things. I think we had to. It's even nicer that we got back together and did something beautiful.
It's still definitely Blur, but Blur that have moved on. That kind of statement, though, I think is true of most of our albums. Each one has consciously moved on from the last. We're not a band to release the same album over and over. It's an album in which you can feel the kind of closed-in claustrophobia of Hong Kong, but also it's a very romantic album. It's lots of really quite beautiful melodies, as always balanced with some quite angry guitars.
Go Out is just a sort of throwaway, nasty kind of groove. You know, I think if you'd never have been able to produce that, if you'd gone to a posh studio with sort of thinking about we must write the new lead track for the new Blur album, but just because it's so relaxed and dirty and gritty, it suddenly starts sounding like Blur again. I think we're best when we're not trying too hard. Well, personally speaking,
that's a sort of what I call a sort of 6:30 in the afternoon song. It sounds a lot dirtier than anything we'd have recorded in the past.
The recordings still really maintain that kind of strangeness that they had in Hong Kong, but we didn't make them posh or anything, but they were still patching up the odd. We needed stronger drums on this one and that one, and some bass too as well.
It's been good doing it this way because every time I've come back to it, it's moved on quite a bit.
It's quite difficult when you've sort of subconsciously sung stuff that's got quite a strong message, and yet you haven't actually articulated anything, to come back to it and go, well, what was I talking about there? I mean, clearly I was in Hong Kong and I probably just got off the tube, maybe feeling that, maybe just driving through the insane kind of sort of high-rise habitation of the city.
it's an incredibly powerful thing to have, being able to make that noise together. And it seems to overcome all arguments and divides and anything other than love that we feel for each other. Just getting back together and playing, especially in front of an audience.
There's clearly a sort of a sensitivity and dynamic which can only be acquired by having done a lot of gigs together, and those three musicians were the ones that I started learning how to be a musician with, so there's always going to be something there.
Lonesome Street's got a similar, it's familiar to people who know Blur, I guess. You know, it's a kind of mid-tempo thing. It's got those kind of familiar chording shapes, sounds of those chords, slightly cheeky sort of melody line and tons of catchiness, you know.
It's one of those songs that we really enjoy playing live. And I mean, and that reference to the 514 to East Grinstead, that was what I sang in Hong Kong. That's the line which I kept. I could have changed it to, I don't know, somewhere a reference to, but I thought I'd just keep that one because I must have been thinking at that point, because we've got a lot of friends back in the day who come from Sussex.
I think it was a good way of working that we had this massive output, splurged it all out And I think it was good that I had tons of time to really go through it and look at it, and not just with a guitarist's head on. As almost, I guess, a producer or just a musician, a general musician, or an ear or a fan as well. All of those things. And think about the other members in the group who, in my head, were all sitting around either nodding their head or shaking their head as I was doing this with Stephen.
The thing about us making music together is it's a very exciting thing to do, and we think it sounds good.
Went into it for a big listen, and this song came on, which has always been a song that I thought it's a pretty one, it's lovely, and I was like, hang on a minute, and started hearing these lyrics coming through.
It's about, like, you know, giving someone a second, third chance, and then them seemingly just blowing it again with you, you know, and you're like, oh God, I think I can cope with this anymore.
You can write about our relationship very well, but I don't think he's really written it quite so obviously, I guess, as in that I see sort of terracotta hearts, you know, him looking out for me a little bit, you know, and not being ashamed of having kind of sentimental feelings. You know, you're not really allowed to have them when you're a man, hugely.
Although I've used Hong Kong as a metaphor, there's an awful lot about our relationship, especially my relationship with Graham, on it. Because it just felt like, well, that's what this record is. You know, if it has an emotional truth, it's somewhere in that reconciliation between us two.
It's really odd, but someone said, hey, you've always written about him though, haven't you, or something. And I think it's kind of true in a way. I think Damon can sometimes have this thing of experiencing the world through me, or getting a lot of energy through me about some other experience. I don't know.
I thought I Was a Spaceman is a really interesting journey. It's a song that fitted perfectly into our state of mind and to the sort of, you know, the way that the insanely claustrophobic cities like Hong Kong can induce a sort of a spacey, dreamlike state in you just to sort of deal with.
Kind of sense of missing home out of his lyrics really comes across strong to me. You know, I think we were all feeling that a bit in Hong Kong. We had taken the decision not to go home. That's something you don't do lightly.
The new stuff is taking it kind of more into a sort of a science fiction territory, I guess, and almost more melancholic. That's kind of where this album, as people our age, after tons of literature and thinking about life, I guess, has put us with this record. It's going to be great to be able to play new songs. The problem is, I mean, the schedule is so tight that the danger is that we're not going to be able to learn how to play them. I mean, obviously the bare bones of these things and the meat and potatoes of these songs are things that we played, but they were a part of, that hardly conscious jam session kind of thing, where you're in a zone, you don't quite know what you're doing.
Because it's such a stripped back and bare, essentially it's just four guys in a sweaty room with no windows jamming. So it should be a really, really good thing to do live. I mean, there's nothing there that isn't the four of us. You know, it's just a stripped back and bare, skin and bones rock record.